I had exactly $847 in my checking account the morning Barrett Ross told me to mop up industrial packing sludge with the shirt off my back. $847 between me and eviction, between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. The overhead fluorescence in the loading bay reflected off that gray chemical mess on the concrete, making it look almost metallic, almost beautiful in a sick way. His finger jabbed the air between us like he was loading a weapon. "Since you're dressed so casually today, why don't you mop it up with your shirt?" His voice carried across the entire warehouse, deliberate, making sure everyone heard the joke. The laughter behind him was sharp and mean, the kind that cuts. But I had something in my back pocket he didn't know about. A small black notebook with dates, quotes, photos, and one specific OSHA regulation I'd memorized word for word. I looked at that spill kit sitting right there on the shelf, bright yellow with reflective tape, completely ignored like it didn't exist. Then I looked back at Barrett and said 5 words that made his smile freeze on his face like ice forming on a windshield. "I'm refusing an unsafe one." The whole loading bay went silent. Someone's radio crackled with static. A forklift beeped in reverse somewhere far away. What happened next would cost him everything. Let me take you back. I'd been working the night shift at Crossway Distribution Center in Columbus, Ohio for 8 months. The job paid $16.50 an hour, which was exactly 50 cents more than the warehouse across town. And in my situation, 50 cents mattered. My apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in German Village with thin walls and a radiator that clanked like someone was hitting it with a hammer all winter long. The rent was $925 a month, due on the 1st, late fees starting on the 6th. I'd learned to count every dollar, every shift, every hour of overtime I could scrape together. Barrett Ross was the night shift supervisor. 38 years old, company polo shirt always crisp, shoes always polished to a mirror shine. His nameplate gleamed on his office door upstairs, polished metal that reflected his smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. First week I started, he called me kiddo, in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. I was 26, not a child, but he said it anyway. By the 5th week, I heard him call me dead weight when he thought I was out of earshot. By month 2, he started calling me at 2 in the morning to check the loading docks, knowing full well I lived 40 minutes away in the next county. I came running every single time. When trucks ran late and angry drivers pounded on the bay doors demanding someone let them in. When forklifts coughed black smoke and died mid-aisle, blocking entire sections. When the computer scanners glitched and crashed and boxes piled up like a wave about to break over everything. I was the one they called. Always me. I knew which drivers drank too much coffee and got jittery on the road. I knew which ones fell asleep in their cabs and needed a knock on the window. I knew which pallets were stacked crooked and would fall if you looked at them wrong. I knew which racking bolts were loose and needed tightening before someone died. But Barrett treated me like I was disposable, like I was nothing. That question burned in my chest every single shift, hot and constant like a coal that wouldn't go out. Why was I treated like trash when I'd put in hours that bent my back and left my shoulders aching and grease under my fingernails that wouldn't scrub out no matter how hard I tried? I started keeping the notebook after my first month, right after I realized no one else was paying attention to anything. No one was watching. No one cared. It began as pure survival instinct, the cheap spiral-bound kind you find in a bin near the pharmacy checkout counter, black cover gone soft from being shoved in my back pocket during every shift. Inside were dates written in blue ink, direct quotes, screenshots I'd printed at the library and carefully taped onto the pages, schedules Barrett had changed at the last minute to force what he called voluntary overtime, though there was nothing voluntary about it. Photos of pallets stacked 3 feet above the red safety line, swaying dangerously when forklifts drove past too fast. Over time, the notebook became something different. A ledger of wrongs, a record of negligence, hard evidence. I'd written down the exact time Barrett screamed at Aiden for being 10 minutes late, then left 2 hours early himself. I'd noted every single safety shortcut, every ignored warning, every close call that made my stomach drop. The notebook felt heavy in my pocket, pressing against my leg like it weighed 10 pounds instead of a few ounces. Then came that Tuesday morning in late September when everything changed. The loading bay was busy, pallets moving, scanners beeping, the usual chaos of the end of a night shift. I was running my pallet jack toward the staging area when I saw it. Gray packing sludge, the industrial kind that comes from hydraulic leaks, spread across the floor in a slick pool about 3 feet wide. The overhead lights reflected off the mess, making it shimmer. It was a hazard, a slip risk, the kind of thing that could send someone to the hospital with a cracked skull if they stepped wrong. I looked around for the spill kit. It was right there on the metal supply shelf bolted to the wall, bright yellow with reflective tape on all 4 sides, exactly where it had been for months. I was about to grab it when Barrett's voice cut through the noise. "Hey!" His footsteps echoed across the concrete as he walked toward me, deliberate, slow. "You see this mess?" "Yeah," I said. "I was just about to clean it up." He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed over his company polo. The Crossway logo stretched across his chest. His eyes flicked down to my clothes. I was wearing my usual work shirt, nothing fancy, just a plain gray tee under my safety vest. Then he smiled. That smile, the one that made my stomach turn. "Since you're dressed so casually today, why don't you mop it up with your shirt?" The words hung in the air. Behind him, I heard laughter. Sharp, mean, the kind that cuts. I looked around. Aiden turned back to his pallet. Abel suddenly found something fascinating on his phone. Luis walked away toward the far dock. No one would meet my eyes. My hands went to my work badge, fingers fumbling with the plastic clip. My pulse should have been racing, hammering in my ears, but instead it steadied. Smooth as glass, cold as ice. I took a breath that filled my lungs all the way down to the bottom. This was the moment. I could feel it. The moment stretched out, rubber band tight. I bent down, but not toward the sludge like he expected. My knees cracked as I crouched beside the metal supply shelf. I grabbed the spill kit with both hands, felt my fingers shake against the plastic handle. The anger steadied them, though, better than any amount of coffee or adrenaline ever could. I walked back slowly, deliberately, each step measured, and set the kit on the pallet scale between us. I placed it down like a chess piece being moved into position. The metal made a hollow sound that echoed slightly. Barrett took a step toward me. His polished shoes caught the overhead fluorescent lights. Gleaming expensive leather, probably $200. I watched his face carefully, looking for the exact moment he'd make his choice. Would he back down now that I'd called his bluff? Would he double down and make this whole situation worse? The rest of the crew had stopped pretending to work entirely now. Everyone was watching. I could feel their eyes on my back, on my hands, on the yellow spill kit sitting between me and Barrett like a piece of evidence presented in court. My heart hammered once, twice, 3 times. Then I straightened my spine and waited, saying nothing. This was his move now, his decision. Barrett swaggered closer, closing the distance between us with deliberate steps. He stopped exactly 3 feet away. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive. His arms crossed over his chest again. His jaw was tight. "You refusing a direct order?" His voice was quieter now, but somehow sharper, meaner, more dangerous. I looked him straight in the eye and didn't blink. My voice surprised even me when it came out. Calm, level, surgical in its precision. "I'm refusing an unsafe one." The difference between those 2 things mattered more than anything. Refusing him personally was insubordination, grounds for immediate termination. Refusing an unsafe order was my legal right under federal law. I'd looked it up. I'd memorized the regulation number. Title 29, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1977.12. Employee protection for refusal to perform unsafe work. I watched his face carefully for any reaction. His smirk faltered just for a second, just long enough. His eyes flicked down to the yellow spill kit between us, then back up to meet mine. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not here, not in his kingdom, Not by someone like me. I'd found something important just then. A seam in his armor, a crack in the foundation. Behind Barrett, I saw Abel shift his weight from one foot to the other, still watching, waiting. The whole warehouse was waiting. So was I. The break room at 3:10 in the morning always felt wrong somehow, like a place that existed outside normal time. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like trapped insects trying to escape. The clock on the wall with the cracked plastic cover ticked too loud, each second audible. 2 coworkers sat at the scratched plastic table, both stirring powdered creamer into burnt coffee without looking up at me when I walked in. I poured my own cup from the pot that had been sitting on the burner for 4 hours. My hands were still shaking slightly from the leftover adrenaline. One of them finally spoke, his voice low and careful. "You're picking a fight you won't win." He didn't look at me when he said it, just kept stirring his coffee in slow circles, watching the liquid swirl. The other one nodded in agreement without saying anything. I stared into my own cup. The coffee was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen on top that caught the light. I realized something important then, standing there in that cold room with the vending machine humming in the corner and the smell of old coffee heavy in the air. I wasn't picking a fight. I was documenting one. There's a real difference between those two things. A fight is emotional, reckless, stupid, something that happens in the moment. Documentation is cold. Facts and timestamps and evidence that doesn't care about anyone's feelings. I wasn't trying to beat Barrett with my fists or even with my words. I was building a case against him, brick by brick, entry by entry, line by line. And legal cases don't lose their temper or make stupid mistakes. I'd started reading OSHA regulations in the bathroom during my lunch break a few weeks back. I'd pull up the official website on my phone, scroll through the dense legal text that made my eyes hurt, thumb carefully marking sections like they were Bible verses I needed to memorize. Title 29, CFR 1910, Spill Response Procedures, Fall Protection Requirements, Powered Industrial Truck Regulations. The language was dry, technical, boring enough to put anyone to sleep, until I started picturing actual faces instead of abstract concepts. Aiden, who had 3 kids under 10 years old at home. Abel, who was saving every penny for his daughter's quinceañera next spring. Luis, who drove in from 2 towns over because the pay here was better than anywhere closer. What if the next joke Barrett made wasn't about sludge on a concrete floor? What if it was about blood? What if someone actually got hurt because Barrett cut corners and ignored rules, and I'd seen it coming and done absolutely nothing to stop it? That thought kept me awake at night sometimes. The regulations weren't just boring legal words anymore after that realization. They were armor I could wear. They were weapons I could use. I screenshotted entire paragraphs and saved them in a folder on my phone labeled Work Stuff. I memorized section numbers until I could recite them in my sleep. I learned the language of liability, of violation, of criminal negligence. Knowledge is power. Everyone says that. But specific knowledge, the kind that comes with official codes and financial penalties attached, that's a completely different kind of power entirely. I took my first photo on a Tuesday morning right before my shift ended. Forklift number 7, the one with the chipped yellow paint and the persistent smell of burning oil that made your eyes water. The seatbelt was cracked straight down the middle, held together with silver duct tape wrapped around it multiple times. Someone had looped the whole thing behind the seat so the safety alarm wouldn't beep when you sat down. Clever solution, incredibly dangerous. I crouched beside the machine and zoomed in carefully on the inspection sticker riveted to the frame. 6 months overdue. The date was faded but still readable if you looked close. I saved the photo to a hidden album on my phone, one buried 3 folders deep in my photo library. I labeled it simply Receipts. It felt dramatic when I first typed that name, but receipts were exactly what they were. Proof of negligence, evidence of violations. I took more photos over the following weeks, dozens of them, pallets stacked in front of the fire exit, blocking it completely. Extension cords daisy-chained together in a line like some kind of electrical suicide pact waiting to spark. The emergency eye wash station with an actual padlock on it because someone kept stealing the saline bottles to flush their contact lenses. Each photo was a timestamp, a GPS coordinate, a piece of hard evidence. How many receipts would it take to buy my freedom from this place? I didn't know yet, but I was collecting them like currency, like savings, like ammunition. We heard the sound before we actually saw what was happening. A metallic groan, the sound of steel bending under too much weight. I looked up from my pallet jack just as the loaded pallet on rack D4 started to tilt forward. Boxes shifted, sliding toward the edge. Everything moved in slow motion. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The forklift driver slammed both feet on the brake pedal. The whole machine lurched forward, then jerked to a stop. Boxes skidded right to the edge of the pallet but somehow didn't fall. For 3 long seconds that felt like an hour, nobody in the entire warehouse breathed. Nobody moved. Then the pallet slowly settled back. The driver climbed down from his seat, his face gray like old concrete. He walked over to me on shaking legs, hands trembling. "Brake's been mushy for weeks," he whispered, looking around to make sure no supervisors were listening. "Told them twice already." "Told who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He just looked at me. We both knew. He'd told Barrett. Barrett had nodded, said he'd handle it, promised to put in a work order, and then did absolutely nothing. The driver went back to work without another word. I pulled out my small black notebook and wrote it all down in careful detail. Date, exact time, rack D4, near-miss incident, brake failure reported twice and deliberately ignored. I underlined the word ignored twice with heavy pen strokes. Would this be the one that finally mattered? Or would it take someone actually getting hurt or killed before anyone paid attention? Barrett handed me the paper the next morning, right as I was about to clock out. "Coaching notice," he said with a smile that made my stomach turn. I read the header first, then the body text. Disruptive tone during work hours, insubordination, failure to follow direct supervisory orders. My cheeks burned hot with anger and humiliation. The words were so carefully chosen, written in that special corporate language designed specifically to protect the company and throw employees under the bus. I folded the paper once, creasing it sharp and deliberate. Then I pulled out my phone right there in front of him and took a photo of the entire document, making sure the company letterhead was visible. His smile twitched. "What are you doing?" "Keeping a copy for my records," I said. My voice stayed even and calm. I went home that morning and wrote my rebuttal on my old laptop at the kitchen table. No emotion, no anger, no accusations, just cold facts, timeline of events, names of witnesses, the existence of the spill kit he'd ignored, the specific OSHA regulation I'd cited about refusing unsafe work. I emailed it to HR and BCC'd myself. The next day, HR called me into their office. The woman behind the desk smiled thin and professional, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "We'll review this thoroughly," she said in that careful tone. But her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Would they actually review it? Or would it disappear into some filing cabinet drawer, never to be seen again until a lawsuit forced them to look? The janitor wheeled his cleaning cart past my station 2 nights later. His name was Vivian, and he'd worked at Crossway longer than anyone else in the building. Maybe 15 years. He was invisible, the way janitors always are in these places. People looked right through him like he was a ghost. He paused by my pallet jack and bent down like he was picking up a piece of trash from the floor. "I saw what he did to you," he murmured quietly. His eyes were soft but steady when they met mine. He slid a folded paper towel toward me across the concrete. I waited until he moved on with his cart before I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a list written in neat, careful handwriting. Dates, times, brief descriptions. Minor spills he'd been called to clean up over the past 6 months. Spills that should have been officially logged and properly investigated. Spills that were evidence of something bigger, something systematically wrong with how this place operated. I looked up, but Vivian was already halfway across the warehouse, pushing his cart toward the office section. Why was he helping me? Maybe he was tired too. Tired of seeing dangerous things and saying nothing. Tired of being invisible. Tired of watching people get hurt. I folded the paper towel carefully and tucked it into my notebook. I had an ally now. Unexpected, but real. Maybe that would be enough to make a difference. There's an old dome camera mounted above the time clock where we all punch in and out. Most people forget it's even there because the little red recording light died years ago. Everyone just assumes it's broken. A piece of abandoned security theater. I didn't assume that. I'd watched the IT guy replace the hard drive once during a night shift, muttering under his breath about storage space issues. The camera worked fine, it just didn't advertise itself. I filed a formal written request with HR for footage from 2 specific nights. The night Barrett ordered me to clean a chemical spill with my shirt, and the night of the near-catastrophic pallet fall on rack D4. I cited the official safety policy Barrett himself had made us all sign during new employee onboarding sessions. The policy that specifically said workplace incidents would be reviewed using all available resources and documentation. I submitted the form on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I still hadn't heard back from anyone. I checked the camera when I clocked in for my shift. The little access panel below it was closed and locked. If the footage existed, and I was certain it did, would someone make it quietly disappear? Or would they be too slow, too careless, too confident, and leave it there for me to find? At 2:27 in the morning, I sat alone in the public library parking lot with my laptop balanced on my steering wheel. The building was closed and dark, but the Wi-Fi signal reached outside to the parking spaces. I drafted the email 3 separate times, deleting it twice because I lost my nerve. My hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. Then I closed my eyes, took a breath, and hit send before I could change my mind again. The anonymous tip went directly to the State Labor Department hotline, carefully routed through a VPN service so it couldn't be traced back to my IP address or location. I attached photos, the forklift with the cracked seatbelt held together with tape, the dangerously overloaded racks, Vivian's handwritten list of unreported chemical spills, the complaint about faulty brakes that had been ignored. I kept my message short, factual, completely free of emotion. No accusations, no dramatics. Just, please investigate the following safety violations at Crossway Distribution Center. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark car. My heart felt like it was trying to physically escape my chest, hammering against my ribs. I'd just swallowed a lit match. The only question now was whether I'd burn up from the inside and turn to ash, or whether I'd light the whole room on fire and expose everything. I drove to work and clocked in at exactly 3 a.m. Nobody looked at me differently. Nobody acted strange. Nobody knew what I'd just done. Yet. The schedule changed again on Friday without warning or explanation. My start time suddenly moved from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. My breaks, which used to be a solid 30 minutes, were now chopped up into 2 separate 15-minute periods. Business needs, Barrett said when I asked him about it directly. He didn't even look at me when he answered, just kept typing on his computer. He was retaliating against me. I knew it absolutely. He knew it. But proving retaliation in a way that would hold up was completely different from knowing it in your gut. I clocked in at exactly 2 a.m. and started logging every single thing that happened. Every pallet I personally moved, every truck I helped unload, every box I scanned, every minute I worked past my scheduled break time. I wrote it all down in my notebook with precise timestamps. If Barrett wanted to create a paper trail against me, I'd give him one right back. I'd make it so thick with documented truth it would be like rope. How long until that rope looped around his ankles and pulled him down? I didn't know. But I wasn't backing down now. Not after everything I'd already done. Not after I'd come this far. I watched him through the office window, laughing with another supervisor, both of them looking relaxed and casual. He thought he'd won. He genuinely believed he'd scared me into either quitting or keeping my mouth shut permanently. He had absolutely no idea what was actually coming for him. He couldn't see the wave building on the horizon, getting bigger, getting closer, about to break right over his head. Word of my one sentence spread through the warehouse the way gossip always does in places like this, through cigarette breaks and lunch tables and whispered conversations in the aisles between shelving units. People started looking at me differently after that confrontation. Some people looked at me like I was completely reckless and stupid. Some looked at me like I was genuinely brave. Most looked at me like I'd just made their own day more dangerous by poking the bear. If Barrett came down hard on me, would he start coming down on them too? Would he make everyone's life miserable because of what I'd done? I saw those questions in their faces. The fear, the resentment, the worry. Was I being selfish by standing up, or was I finally being useful by saying what everyone else was too scared to say? I didn't have a good answer. Aiden started avoiding me completely now. Abel still nodded hello when we passed each other, but he didn't stop to chat anymore. Luis started taking all his breaks alone in his truck. I felt the isolation like cold water rising slowly, getting deeper. But I also felt something else happening. A few people, Vivian, a truck driver named Felix, a woman from receiving named Bryn, they started watching Barrett more carefully now. They started noticing things they'd ignored before. And noticing is always the first step toward actual change. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I felt. A friend of a friend texted me a phone number and a name late one night. Theo Butler, employment attorney. I sat on my front porch after my shift ended, the night air cool and clean on my hands, and dialed the number. He answered on the third ring. His voice was calm, professional, measured. I told him everything, the whole story from the beginning. When I finally finished talking, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said exactly 3 things. Document everything. Don't confront him directly. Don't quit your job. Not yet. I wrote those 3 lines at the very top of a new page in my notebook. They felt like commandments, like rules of engagement, like strategy. Document. Keep doing exactly what I was already doing. Don't confront. Don't give Barrett any excuse to fire me for cause. Don't quit. If I quit voluntarily, I'd lose unemployment benefits, lose leverage, lose everything. They want you to quit, Theo said quietly. Don't give them what they want. I thanked him and hung up. But sitting there in the dark, staring at those 3 lines, I wondered if I could actually follow those rules. Could I stay silent while Barrett kept pushing? Could I keep my head down and my mouth shut while he tried to break me? The inspectors arrived 1 week later. 2 of them, both wearing identical navy polos with the State Labor Department logo embroidered on the chest. They had clipboards and cameras and an air of authority that made everyone in the warehouse straighten up and start looking busy. Barrett met them at the front office, all smiles and handshakes, playing the gracious host. I watched from my station near the loading dock, pulse racing. They walked through the warehouse slowly, methodically, taking photos of everything. The racks, the forklifts, the emergency exits, the eye wash station with the padlock still on it. One of them stopped in front of forklift number 7. He crouched down, examining the cracked seatbelt wrapped with duct tape. He took 3 photos from different angles. Then he turned to Barrett. When was this last inspected? Barrett's smile didn't falter. Our vendor handles all of that. I can get you the paperwork. Please do. They moved on, checking each piece of equipment, each safety station, each exit route. They spent 20 minutes on the loading dock, measuring the height of stacked pallets, checking clearances, photographing blocked exits. When they finally left, Barrett stood in the office doorway, watching them go. His smile was gone. His jaw was tight. He knew. He knew someone had called them, and he was going to find out who. The inspectors returned 1 week later. This time they brought a supervisor and a box of bright orange tamper seals. They weren't asking anymore. They were acting. They marked 3 forklifts out of service with tags that couldn't be removed without breaking. They tagged sections of racking with yellow caution tape. They asked for the maintenance log in its original form. Barrett tried to laugh it off. He handed over a binder. One inspector flipped through it slowly, page by page. Then he stopped. He looked up. These entries, he said. Same handwriting, Same pen, same pressure, all filled out at once. Barrett's face went pale. Our vendor handles that, he said too quickly. The inspector tilted his head. Your vendor's initials are the same as yours, he said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. B.R. Barrett Ross. If a man deflates, does it make a sound? I found out that day. It's a quiet thing. A hiss. A sigh. The inspector closed the binder and handed it to his partner. Barrett cornered me by the time clock after the inspectors left. His voice was low and hot, pressed close to my ear. You think this is over? Spit flew. You'll never work in this town again. I'll make sure of it. I looked at the clock. The red numbers glowed bright, painting my skin. Time felt like a weapon in that moment. Something you could hold. Something you could wield. Maybe not here, I said quietly. But I won't be the one who can't show my face. I clocked out. The machine beeped. Barrett stood there, frozen. I walked past him toward the exit. My legs felt shaky, but I didn't let it show. Behind me, I heard him breathing hard. Did he hear the door closing? Not the physical door. The other one. The one on his career, his reputation, his easy cruelty. I pushed through the exit into the night. The air was cold and clean. I filled my lungs and kept walking. The email came at 9:02 on a Monday morning. I was asleep, phone buzzing on my nightstand. I grabbed it, squinting at the screen. The subject line read, Personnel Update. Barrett Ross had been suspended pending investigation. By 9:05, my phone was blowing up. Texts from coworkers, screenshots of the company-wide email. The warehouse buzzed like a hive that had finally heard its own wings. People were talking, asking questions, saying things they'd been too scared to say before. 1 week later, another email. Barrett had been terminated for falsifying safety records, retaliation against employees, and willful safety violations. HR was being restructured. The warehouse manager was being reassigned. I came in for my next shift, and the room felt different. People stood straighter, talked louder. Someone had removed Barrett's nameplate from the office door. The space where it used to be was cleaner than the rest, a bright rectangle of paint. Was it lighter because of the new lights they'd installed, or because we could finally breathe? A competing facility called me 3 weeks later. The manager said an inspector had recommended me. Someone who actually gives a damn, he'd said. They offered me a supervisor position, better pay, day shift, actual benefits. I walked into my new office on a Wednesday morning. It wasn't fancy, just a desk, a computer, a window. But the window caught the sunrise, painting everything copper and gold. I could see trucks pulling in, drivers unloading in the cool morning air. It felt right. One afternoon, about a month in, I saw him through the glass. Barrett. He was wearing a delivery uniform, scanning a package at our receiving dock. His eyes stayed down. He didn't look up. I watched him for a moment and waited for the triumph to hit, the satisfaction, the revenge. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt relief, like stepping out of a too-tight shoe, like finally putting down something heavy. He'd ordered me to mop a floor with my shirt. I'd answered with one sentence and a plan, and that's how the mess finally got cleaned. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I'd do it differently. The answer is no. Not because it was easy, it wasn't. Not because I didn't lose things. I did. Friends who stopped talking to me, nights I couldn't sleep, weeks when I thought I'd made a huge mistake. But I'd do it again because silence costs more than speaking up. Because someone had to say no. Because the next person might not have been as lucky as I was. They might have gotten hurt. They might have died. And I would have known I could have stopped it. The notebook sits in my desk drawer now. I don't need it anymore, but I keep it as a reminder. Document. Don't confront. Don't quit. And know when the moment comes to stop being quiet and start being loud. Barrett thought he could humiliate me into submission. He thought I was weak, easy, disposable. He was wrong. And now he knows it. The warehouse still runs. The trucks still come, but the air is different now, cleaner, safer. That's enough for me. So here's my question for you. Have you ever stood up to someone who thought you'd stay silent forever? What happened when you finally said no? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. There are more where this came from. Stories about people who refused to be pushed around. People who fought back with documentation, evidence, and the law. People who won. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.